Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast, where we talk about pharmacy topics and careers, so you feel connected to the profession of pharmacy and inspired to contribute to it. I'm your host, Ohio pharmacist Kim Newlove. This is episode 355, and you can find the show notes at thepharmacistvoice.com. In honor of Veterans Day, which is coming up next week on Tuesday, November 11th, Dr. Anthony Morreale is my guest today. As a civilian, Dr. Morreale had a long career as a VA pharmacist and helped many veterans, among other patients. I would like to read a brief introduction in just a minute, but first, I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Pam Schweitzer for nominating Dr. Morreale for this episode. Thanks, Pam. And now let's get to Dr. Morreale's introduction. Dr. Anthony Morreale has demonstrated his professionalism and expertise as a clinician, manager, and leader in pharmacy since his pharmacy career began in 1983. He has over 20 years of direct patient care experience as a clinical pharmacist in both acute and ambulatory care. He has decades of experience as a pharmacy manager, leader, and executive. Dr. Morreale is board certified in pharmacotherapy and has been recognized by the American Society of Health Systems Pharmacists as a certified pharmacy executive leader. Dr. Morreale has been engaged as a business consultant, quality reviewer for standards of practice, and has served as an expert in medical legal cases. Dr. Morreale has expert knowledge and experience in nearly all areas of pharmacy practice, including but not limited to regulatory, operational, and clinical pharmacy standards of practice for large health systems, drug absorption, metabolism, excretion, outcomes, and adverse effects of both pharmaceuticals and street drugs, and application of patient genomics to therapeutic response and toxicities of various medications. Dr. Morreale retired in October of 2024, so as I read this in November 2025, about a year ago, he retired from his role as Associate Chief Consultant for Clinical Pharmacy Services and Policy for the Department of Veterans Affairs, also known as the VA, Pharmacy Benefit Management, PBM, in the VA Central Office, where he oversaw national clinical pharmacy services, policy development, pay, recruitment, retention, and legislation. He also has significant experience in health outcomes research. Dr. Morreale is a highly experienced speaker, both nationally and internationally, and is very comfortable delivering understandable and succinct messages to various audiences, including now you, my podcast audience today. Dr. Morreale has authored or co-authored over 90 articles. He has served on editorial boards and as a reviewer on a number of professional journals. He's been actively involved in leadership roles within many pharmacy organizations, both nationally and internationally. Dr. Morreale is the recipient of numerous awards, including the ASHP Best Practice Award, the ASHP Literature Award for Innovation, the VA Undersecretary's Innovation Award, the JMCP Quality Reviewer Award for Accuracy, the San Diego Society Pharmacist of the Year, the California Michelotti Public Health Prize, the AMCP AV Award, and most recently, the APHA Distinguished Federal Pharmacist Award in 2018, the ASHP Award for Excellence in 2020, and the ASHP Best Practice Award in 2024. To learn more about Dr. Anthony Morreale after the interview today, visit morrealeconsulting.com. That's MORREALE consulting.com. Or connect with Dr. Morreale on LinkedIn. Both of those links are in the show notes on thepharmacistvoice.com. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Anthony Morreale. Hi, Dr. Morreale. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. You have had a long and interesting career. I am very happy to have you here on the podcast to talk to my audience about your career and so much more. Let's dive in. Your career has been decades long, and you've had decades of service with the Department of Veterans Affairs. In fact, I read on your CV that you were recognized as the 2018 Distinguished Federal Pharmacist by APHA and an honorary member of the United States Public Health Service. How did you become interested in a pharmacy career with the VA?
I imagine, like other people, we think about our careers as this carefully plotted course, leading to some destination, especially when we first get out of school. But the truth is that the career paths that people have are rarely straight lines. I think it's, to me, like visiting a new vacation destination. You start out of an idea like what you want to visit, and then you get sidetracked by all these wonderful things that you see. So, as far as a career is concerned, there are things that you never anticipate. You have a conversation with somebody, it sparks a new idea. You have an opportunity for a job that you never considered, or a person that you meet really changes the dynamic or the trajectory of your career. It's really, I think, good to be flexible. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But in my case, it was really no different for the VA. I was serving as faculty for the University of Pacific up in Northern California. And suddenly there was a vacancy in San Diego. And that was an area where I was hoping to relocate because I was originally from Southern California and spent a lot of time in San Diego. So I connected with the chief of pharmacy down there, and he encouraged me to come to the VA. But I was a little reluctant, to be honest with you, because the pay was very low at the time. But there was also very limited number of jobs in San Diego. I really explored it more and saw that the VA was really on the cutting edge of clinical pharmacy and moving away from the dispensing platform, and that was something that was really of interest to me. So, nearly 40 years later, I had more than 10 different positions within the VA, which is really one of the opportunities in a healthcare system like the VA is that you don't have to stay in one particular job, and there is often many different opportunities. So that really led to a long career in the VA.
Thank you for explaining your story. I noticed that you never became a commissioned corps officer with the U.S. Public Health Service. Is there a reason that you remained a civilian?
Yeah, so as many of your listeners may know, there are essentially you can join the military or a service or a uniform service, or you could be civil service. And I really felt I had so many opportunities within the VA in civil service that there wasn't really a need to do that. I also didn't want to leave San Diego, and being reassigned to a different location is one of the limitations of being a uniformed officer. But I also had an opportunity all through my career to work with Indian Health, with the Department of Defense, with various offices from FDA, CDC, and other federal agencies. So, there was that connection within the VA with all those other agencies. So, really, I didn't see a need to move out of the VA in order to do that.
I appreciate you sharing that because there may be somebody listening to this who's thinking about a career with the VA and they're thinking, well, surely I have to join the United States Public Health Service Commissioned Corps. But you come into this interview and you explain your position as a civilian, and now you've given them something else to think about. So thank you. You were nominated as a guest by our mutual friend, Dr. Pam Schweitzer. Can you tell me at what point in your career you met Pam?
Well, it's an interesting story, but Pam at one point was a chief of pharmacy, a new chief of pharmacy up in the Dakotas. And she, at the time, I was really working around the VA at different sites trying to spread pharmaceutical care. And she wanted to start clinical programs up there, which they didn't have at the time. And so she invited me to come up there and speak. to their staff. And actually, I spent a couple days up there going about over, what clinical pharmacy was about and what pharmaceutical care was about and how they could get started on the program. And subsequent to that, she was able to really start some clinical pharmacy programs, and then she moved on to other services and as a uniform services person. And we kind of lost track of each other for some 15 or 20 years. Then it came around where she was in charge of public health office and reached out again for new things that I had gotten involved in. And we hooked up again, and I worked with their services again to launch new clinical pharmacy programs. So again, kind of went in there, met with all the people of the public health service, and tried to get them on a new trajectory for clinical pharmacy. So it's been a long, probably 35 years or more that I've known Dr. Schweitzer. A fantastic relationship, wonderful person.
Yes, she is still interested in pharmacy innovation even in her retirement. So I think you and she have that in common. So I later in the interview we'll talk about what lights you up about consulting and what's next for you because I'm sure you've got some interesting stories in that category as well.
Oh yeah, and I just talked to Pam a couple days ago. So
Did you? Did she remind you that she nominated you for this
no,
podcast?
she did not. That topic didn't come up, but she had some other things that she wanted, that she was thinking about, that she wanted to get input on. So we have that relationship where we kind of bounce things off each other.
I love that. Yeah, she's a wonderful person to bounce ideas off of, and
Yeah.
she absorbs everything too. She picks up the good ideas and runs with them as well. So I'm sure that was a great conversation. Let's move on to my next question. I want to talk about niches in the pharmacy profession. There are several niches in the pharmacy profession that have grown popular, like pharmacogenomics and functional medicine. Some people are interested in cannabis medicine. Popularity can distract even the best pharmacist from their true calling. So, what I want to do is ask you for advice for pharmacists who are trying to find their niche in the pharmacy profession, especially new grads. What advice do you have for them about finding their niche?
It's a great question. And, in today's pharmacy landscape, it's pretty easy to get swept up in the kind of excitement associated with these expanding opportunities. And I do want to say that, these niches are exciting and they are shaping the future of healthcare. So I certainly don't want to distract people to not go into those areas, but popularity alone really shouldn't be the motivation. So for new grads, especially, I think the pressure to specialize can be a little bit overwhelming, especially now that pharmacy is going in so many different directions. So my advice to them is one, do a residency. And I've always been a big advocate of pharmacy residencies because I think although the pharmacy schools do a good job educating people about the pharmacy profession, you have limited exposure to all the different areas of practice. So when you do a PGY residency, especially at a facility that has great clinical pharmacy programs and diverse clinical pharmacy programs, I think after a year of that, you get exposed to all the different practices or a lot of different practices. And you get to talk to a lot of people about their thoughts, their feelings. How did they get into that specialty? And it really does help people narrow down their options. I don't think it solves all that issue because I have many PGY1 residents that were struggling about, do you do PGY2 or do you take a job in a different area? But it certainly allowed them to narrow it down. And a lot of them surprisingly went into practice areas they never thought they would go into after they did their PGY1 residency. With exposure to different practices and people should not be surprised that their career moves into an area that they didn't expect. It's important that they stay open, trust their feelings about what excites them, and then start to pursue things at that point.
Great advice. I want to jump in here and ask you about having relationships with these students throughout the years. I know you've demonstrated that you can maintain a relationship with Pam Schweitzer over the years. Have you kept in touch with these PGY1 residents that you've come into contact with?
Yes, a lot of them. And a lot of them ended up going on with their own great careers, both within the VA and external to the VA. Some of them I had the opportunity to then hire back when I was in different positions, and have kept the relationships. One of the great things when I moved into VA central office in charge of all clinical pharmacy programs for the VA, we had about 11,000 pharmacists, and out of those pharmacists, about 6,000 of them were advanced practice pharmacists. And many of those people were residents of mine or students of mine. And so every once in a while, as I traveled around and I interacted with all the sites, oftentimes there would be people that I had initial relationships with that we were able to kind of revisit those relationships and work with those people over time. So, I was very fortunate to be able to mentor a lot of people, but also, they mentored me and they helped me later in my career be the influential leaders who made stuff happen, because you had that relationship with them, and when you wanted to launch a new program, they were often the first people that would raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'd love to do that and work with you again on doing these new programs." And so it really led to a lot of success for me and our program office because we had all these relationships that were out there.
It sounds like you got them off to a good start, and then what comes around goes around. They came back to you later in life and helped you out.
100%. 100%.
So
So,
cool.
yeah, it was very cool.
I love that. I feel like the circle of life from The Lion King is playing in the back of my head somewhere.
Right.
It's the circle of pharmacy life. All right. We're going to move on to the next question here.
Okay.
Pharmacists are well positioned to fill gaps in the US healthcare system. What are some of the gaps that you have filled during your career, and what are some of the gaps that you'd like to see pharmacists fill here in the year 2025 and beyond in the VA or other settings?
I would say throughout my career, I really did focus when I was, I had different phases of my career. The first phase was as a clinician. And, I really focused on trying to fill gaps in care and make a difference in clinical practice. So, and then later on, and I'll give you some examples of, practice areas I worked in starting and I started in medicine, and then I went to surgery unit, and then I was in the ICU. I became an infectious disease pharmacist. Then I worked in a GI clinic doing H. pylori, and then moved on into nephrology. And these things happened because there was these gaps in care at our facility where a physician would say, "But I really would love to have a pharmacist in nephrology." And I was like, "Well, I could do nephrology," right? So I was able to hand off some of the positions I had created, let's say infectious disease, and then go to the nephrology clinic and work with them. And then later on, we would have new pharmacists that would come around, and I'd kind of give them that position, and I'd move into a new gap. So that was kind of my early career. But then later, I realized as I became an administrator, a clinical teaching coordinator, then I moved into associate chief and chief, that it was really good for me to be able to identify the gaps and place the pharmacists that I had underneath me into those gaps, because there was so many talented pharmacists that could really take off and run with these programs. And you can only do so much one clinic at a time by yourself, but as a leader you could sure leverage that by placing people, a whole staff of people, into these new positions. So, and to be honest with you, that's one of the reasons I got the position in central office, because in central office in the VA in Washington, D.C., they wanted to start a new clinical pharmacy program office. And they were looking for somebody that had some history of starting programs in gap areas, right? So I was kind of perfectly suited to be able to do that. And we took off with that, and that was at the time where the VA was just moving to a primary care model with which included pharmacists on the team. So in 2010, that was kind of the first thing: is how do we expand pharmacists as primary care pharmacists? But later on, we worked on a whole bunch of different programs to expand pharmacy practice in different gap areas. And we did that by really focusing on data and looking at where a lot of the drugs are being used, where do the physicians need help, where are there shortages in physicians. So, for example, mental health. We moved quite aggressively into that area. We had a lot of mental health PGY2 residents, and we had to convince the Office of Mental Health and others that the pharmacist could really play an important role in filling those gaps. We ended up doing that in hepatitis C, in infectious disease, in pharmacoeconomics, pain management, substance abuse disorders, and then more recently in pharmacogenomics, just to name a few. So we had very specific, focused programs to expand those areas once we identified them as gaps and opportunities.
That is a heck of a story. Wow. I want to make sure that I reiterate the second half of the question here. You did a great job with the first half. But then in the year 2025 and beyond, what are some of the gaps that you'd like to see other pharmacists fill?
The focus, I think, in the future are several areas. One is a continuation of, I think, what some of the gaps that I already had addressed. I think access to care is a huge issue both within the VA and external to the VA, and that pharmacists, especially in rural and underserved areas, have tremendous opportunity under collaborative practices to really expand their scope and manage chronic diseases. I've been very encouraged by the changes in state laws that have occurred since, really, quite honestly, since the pandemic, where most state laws really now allow pharmacists to prescribe and allow them broader collaborative practices than previously. And that's a tremendous opportunity for pharmacists to really start doing what they're really trained to do, which is to manage chronic disease with full authority and prescriptive privileges. So I think they can help with this shortage of primary care and specialty care physicians across the country by filling those gaps. So that's, I think, the biggest, like, more global thing. There's still tremendous gaps, as you probably are aware, in medication safety and deprescribing. So polypharmacy is pretty rampant, and especially in the geriatric population. So I do believe that there is a tremendous role for pharmacists in that area, and that could be part of the access of care. Once they get in positions, they can do that. But it's also, some people are more specialized in that. So in geriatric medicine, I know we had a lot of people who work to do really specifically look at patients and de-prescribe. And I think that's an important gap area that remains. And then the most advanced things, you mentioned earlier, pharmacogenomics. I'm a huge fan of pharmacogenomics and personalized medicine. I've been certified 3 times in pharmacogenomics, primarily because I couldn't remember it the first couple times. But we are entering in an era where therapy, really personalized and tailored to individual patients, is becoming really important. And I think it's an area where the physicians are not going to be able to really manage it as well as we would like, similar to drug-drug interactions and dosing of renal failure and those kind of things. Pharmacists are perfectly situated to manage that. So I think those are probably the 3 key areas that I see going forward. But I think the way to do that or the key to it is visibility. Pharmacists really have to step up into leadership roles. They have to advocate for that expanded scope. They have to educate the public and other policymakers, and they also need to, convince in some cases the providers that they're going to be doing collaborative practice with. So I think our biggest challenge we had when we went through all these systematic gaps and tried to place pharmacists into different roles was convincing some of the people that the pharmacists could do it. And, it wasn't until they really saw that these pharmacists were as good at it as they were, and sometimes better, that we really got traction. So, for example, in pain management, we had a lot of physicians and other people who were pretty cautious about allowing pharmacists to prescribe opioids and to manage pain as a disease. But I think after we trained up a bunch of pharmacists with their help, and they saw what was really happening, they became much more comfortable with it. So it was a process to kind of convince people to do that. And subsequent to that, then you had the doctors now as your advocate. They have to go to leadership at the medical centers and say, we need to hire pharmacists to do these things because I don't have time. There's only so many pain physicians, right? That stepping up into those leadership roles is really what made some of that happen.
I appreciate you talking about those gaps and how pharmacists can fill them. One of the things that we've not really talked about is how do pharmacists get paid for filling these gaps? Do you have any ideas?
Fortunately, in the VA, we were not a pay model, right? We're a capitated model, and the money comes from Congress to fund the VA. But what the VA does with the money is up to them. And so once you convince the leaders that the best use of their money was a clinical pharmacist to manage some of these diseases, the money flowed, right? Uh, in a way, it's not a billing model, but you still are competing for funds, right? So the nurses want more nurses, the doctors want more doctors, the pharmacy wants more pharmacists. You have to win the economic model and the outcome model. And so I think within the VA, that's what we did. We designed our strategies differently than you would in external to the government. However, I think those same arguments go a long way in private practice, right? So, in other words, if there's a need in a healthcare system to have more oncologists or more pain physicians or whatever, and you realize that the pharmacist is probably half the cost and they can do these treatments and they get equal or better outcomes, then you're making the economic model that, hey, at our healthcare system, maybe we should hire more pharmacists. And on top of billing, and billing has been changing over time, as you probably know. More and more insurance companies are paying for pharmacists to do things. I think there is a growing realization that the pharmacists are a good value in many different areas. And so I think more work needs to be done, clearly, with that. But I am encouraged about what I see happening in private practice as well.
I feel like your answer had to do with data, demonstrating outcomes and talking to the right person who holds the strings to the purse. I think even when it's not pharmacy, you always want to talk to the person who's spending the money. So, most pharmacists that listen to this podcast probably are just your average worker. They're not the person who holds the purse strings. So they may not know that you need to go up that chain of command to the person that holds the ability to spend money. That can be hard when you're a new grad and you're entry level. So, any advice to people who are going to be fighting that fight to try to get the data, show the outcomes, and talk to the right person?
Yeah, it's a great point. And in my opinion, I don't think that is the necessary role that we want to put new pharmacists through. I do think our senior pharmacists and our leaders, your directors of pharmacy, your other people really need to carry the ball with that. Now, not saying that they're not going to get the frontline pharmacists involved, because they are going to need to be involved with collecting data and making the interventions, right? The most important part is the frontline people are actually doing the work, right, with the patients. And it's imperative that the leadership create data infrastructures so that it doesn't burden the pharmacists on the front line, but collects the data they need to make the arguments. And you're right, it's very important that they talk to the money people, but I also think it's very important that they talk with the clinicians, and primarily with your chief of staff, with your directors of, let's say chief of cardiology or chief of other things, showing how the pharmacist could help them. Because ultimately, these resources are decided by a team of people, usually triads or quadrads quadrats at medical centers, where it is the chief of finance or the head of finance. You have the director of the pharmacy, director of the medical center, but you also have, all these clinicians that are saying, I really want these pharmacists. I need these pharmacists. And pharmacy has the data that they get good outcomes and they're a good value. So I think all of that has to merge together, and that is incumbent upon the leadership of the pharmacy to make it happen.
What I hear you saying is you kind of need the right messenger, the person that's representing the pharmacy wing of this whole team.
Yeah, they need that, but even that messenger, they could be the best messenger out there, but they need the data, right? So I really relied heavily in all of our programs that we did on clinical informatics pharmacists. They were able to develop data collection systems to give us the information we needed to justify the programs. And as seamless as you can make that, as background as you can make it, the better. So our pharmacists were documenting what they were doing in their chart notes, or we'd give them chart notes that would have little tags in it, if you will. And once those tags are identified, in the background, the data is being pulled. Here's the pharmacist, here's the intervention they did, here was the outcome. And then that gets rolled up into reports that can be given to the leadership about, hey, how do we promote our pharmacists in this particular area? So data is, extremely important. The message carrier is very important, but the pharmacists at the front line are the ones that have to document what they're doing. It's a team.
It totally is a team. And I think when everybody understands what part they play on the team, then you've got the right people on the bus is moving in the right direction, the right person's driving the bus, all those Jim Collins references from good to great, right?
Yep.
I love that you brought up informatics because I feel like that's a growing field within pharmacy. Did you work with a lot of informatics pharmacists?
Yes. So, we started at VA San Diego the first informatics pharmacist position and the first pharmacoeconomic pharmacist position. And they essentially went hand in hand, right? Because it's really difficult to do pharmacoeconomics without informatics, right? And subsequent to that, every single VA over a period of about 8 or 10 years in the 1990s hired informatics pharmacists. And the VA started a lot of informatics residencies for pharmacists. And so it remains to this day a very powerful benefit. And one of the main reasons, in my opinion, that the VA has been so successful in expanding pharmacy clinical programs is the informatics pharmacists, because they were able to provide the evidence that leaders could use to expand clinical programs. So I love the question. It is something that's kind of an unsung hero, if you will. And when I was in the central office before I retired, I had 22 staff. 4 of them were clinical informatics pharmacists. So just to give you an idea, that the other people were pharmacy leaders that were spreading programs around the country, but they needed the data and the information. A lot of the grants we got, you probably saw that we had several large multi-million dollar grants to spread pharmacy practice. But we were not able to sustain those grants without the fact that we had all of this data showing how successful that money was used. And so it all goes back to kind of the unsung heroes of clinical informatics.
Informatics pharmacists are unsung heroes. I love that little soundbite, and it's true too.
And then one thing I will say that was a benefit in the VA is we had one electronic medical record, right? And it was all over the country. So when you design something with one informatics person in New York, they share it with the people on on the other coast. Eventually, we were able to make one giant database that looks at medication safety, medication use, and all these clinical outcomes that we were trying to measure. We developed tools that every site could implement because they have one electronic medical record system. And so that was a huge benefit when we came to national programs. We started a program called the PharmD program, which was basically pharmacists documenting outcomes. And we got everybody all across the country to start using the software that we developed. And that allowed us to extract data from every site seamlessly without going to a site and say, give me your data. We were able to get that and then show nationally what pharmacists were doing, every intervention, every disease state, all the types of drugs they were prescribing, everything come out of that database. So it was a wonderful invention that really changed the dynamics of the pharmacoeconomics of pharmacist practice.
Yeah, you remove a barrier when you make everything consistent across all the states too. I feel like nowadays there's a lack of, I think Dr. Schweitzer calls it a lack of interoperability, where people on Epic can't communicate with the people on, whatever the other major
Right.
systems are. So it sounds like that was not a problem for the VA. Therefore, it was easy to just jump in, get your hands dirty, and get the information and spread it out.
I would never say easy, but it was a process. But it certainly turned out to be, a big benefit of having that. And we still struggle with importing data from outside, so our patients often get care at other locations. Some of that is in the Department of Defense. Or DoD facilities, and we were able to also create some tools to export or import data from Department of Defense. But if people had care at Kaiser or somewhere else, then of course you struggle still. But hopefully things like med reconciliation and other processes that were put in place help fill those gaps so that it was really in the VA medical record system.
Fair enough. Well, I guess we're going to transition from kind of ending on talking about data to talking about research and writing and presenting. So, kind of similar. You have written, researched, and presented extensively during your career. Among the three, writing, research, and presenting, which one do you enjoy the most and why?
Well, that's a tough question. Each of them have their rewards and their challenges. And quite frankly, I think they are all complementary and necessary to each other. So I have a hard time picking one over the other, but because I think they're all important. I think research is important because that's kind of the spark that the curiosity meeting the discovery and kind of tie it to what we just talked about, which is the informatics piece, right? So research has a lot of forms, right? There's, investigational research, and then there's, regular outcomes research if you look at it. So part of that, when I think about research, a lot of the research that we did was how do we collect data about pharmacist interventions and make meaningful conclusions from it. That's research. You don't have to do a study that's looking at a new investigational drug and see if it's better than placebo, right? So when people think about research, they're like, well, I don't want to go into research because that's kind of a niche and I'm going to get out of clinical care. But they need to think about, how does research fit into my practice and my clinical practice, my dispensing practice, whatever it is. So I think research is important. And sometimes I would just call it data collection and interpretation, but it is research. Writing is critically important to kind of take the raw data and shape it into something meaningful. So when you do research, you do data collection, ultimately you have to write it up and present it to somebody. And it's super important that that be done well. Although I enjoy writing, it's time consuming. It requires patience, especially when you're dealing with the publication process and editors and the timelines that sometimes are involved. I really do enjoy writing most when it's a team project. I don't really like to sit and just write by myself. I think a lot of the projects and a lot of the publications that I was part of were team projects. And it's great because team members write way better articles, I think, than individuals because they have different perspectives, they have different talents, they have different experiences, and they really contribute to the quality, like, of the articles. And lastly, for writing, it's exciting when you see it in publication in a journal. So there's some, I guess, excitement about it and some satisfaction when you see it in writing in a medical journal. But then there's presenting. To me, presenting, especially when you're doing it live, is kind of that moment of connection with people. It's your where your ideas are presented to people and you can see their reactions, you can kind of feel the energy of the room, you can adapt real time to people and your format, whether it's in a classroom or a conference or a podcast. Sometimes it's more of a shared experience, I guess, when you're live. So that's why I think I get a little bit of kick out of presenting.
Presenting live can have unpredictable moments where the audience lets you know something they want to know that you haven't talked about yet. So
You got it.
there you go. That's something that's a little different when you're doing from research and writing. Now, for my audience that's listening to this, they may never have written anything. They may never have seen their name on the title of an article in a major journal, and they want that. Or they may never have been part of a research project. Maybe they're intimidated by it, or maybe they've never presented. Maybe they've submitted a proposal to APHA or their state pharmacist association and got rejected. What advice do you have for pharmacists that may be listening to this who want to write, research, and present?
Yeah, it is often a challenge for people to kind of feel comfortable with that process. I'd say, for publishing, start with a topic you generally are passionate about. But as I mentioned earlier, I think the key for all of these things really is teamwork. Oftentimes, if you want to write an article, you really need to find other people who are passionate about that topic and partner with them and write something. So you might work with a more senior pharmacist that has published a bunch of different articles to work with so that they can mentor you. Oftentimes, the process for publications, even though they're kind of laid out, let's say you're going to publish in APHA or ASHP journal, you can go to the guidelines and read what you have to do, the fonts you have to use, and all that stuff. But people with experience know what the message is that you're going to have to deliver to get that paper accepted, and what is the quality of certain statements and references and things like that. So, you could be a novice and do the formatting and all the other things, but delivering the message sometimes requires somebody to say, hey, did you think about this in a different way? What is the advantage of this article? How are we going to present it as being something different? So, for example, we had people publish what the pharmacist's role is in diabetes for the last 25 years, right? And outcomes pharmacists have got. So, if you have all this great data of what you did in a diabetes clinic with diabetes, you're going to have a hard time getting it published, right? You have to have some kind of twist on it. So one of the things that a kind of more experienced publisher would look at and say is, what is the new message? What is the twist? Because we can't just publish the same old stuff again, right? So the first article, find a mentor. That's what I would say. For research, I think it's a little bit different in that I think it's a matter of seeking out collaborators. So it's pretty rare that researchers, a lot of times researchers are kind of working on a thin dime, if you will, and they rarely turn down free help. And so if you have researchers that are doing a project that you're interested in, you got to volunteer. And so you approach them, you talk to them about your passion for the topic. You ask them if there's any way you can get involved in the project, that you could help. And sometimes they'll say no for a given project, but then on the next project they'll reach back out to you and allow you to be part of those. So I think reaching out to faculty, to preceptors, to peers that are working on these projects that are interest to you is really the key way to get involved in research. And then once you do that, then you kind of get a feel for the different roles that people play within the research project, and you kind of try and find your niche for going forward with any future research. When it comes to presenting, I think one, remembering your voice is valuable. It often is that you turn down for speaking engagements, right? But there are also more local things where people are constantly looking for somebody. So it might be first talking to the nursing staff about a particular topic, or to the physicians about a topic at your medical center. It could be with your local society. It could be with a nursing home. Getting out there and getting some experience then allows you a better CV and a better justification for why people might want to have you at a bigger meeting, and maybe a state or a national meeting. And then, of course, tying it back to the previous two, if the more research you do and the more publishing you do, the more likely is somebody's going to ask you to speak about those topics. And so I found that when I published articles, almost invariably somebody eventually called me and said, "Hey, can you talk about that topic at this meeting?" So it's important to tie the three of them together.
I love the pearls of wisdom. When you were talking about writing, I love that you talked about collaborating, because a lot of us that are new to writing, we think, oh, I have to do everything myself. A lot of times we'll think, oh, I want to write a book. And then you see your name on the cover, right? But when it comes to those journal articles, I think there's rarely just one name on them, right?
Right.
So begin
Yeah.
with the end in mind, plan on collaborating.
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's more fun. And you get better articles because you have different perspectives, and people say, "Hey, I don't like that sentence. Let's reword it." And, oh, that's brilliant. That's really nice. I think the other point I would make about research, presenting, and publishing is, don't wait till you feel like you're ready, because that may never come. You really grow by doing it and going through the process. That they always say the first step is showing up, right? And then the second part is to follow through. And then the magic happens when you get that publication or that research or that presentation, and your work resonates with other people. So that's kind of the strategy, is just get in there and offer yourself, offer your opportunities, and eventually it will happen.
More good pearls of wisdom. Yeah, I love that you addressed the perfectionism that a lot of pharmacists feel. They hesitate to get started because they want to wait until everything's perfect. When it comes to research, people may have something in mind that they really want to do, and they may not think to just start really small and find a gap and volunteer to fill it. Or with presenting, again, people sometimes they really feel passionate about something and they want to go on a national stage like APHA. But then maybe it would be okay to just present at your library or within your own health system first before you go to the national stage. Those are really good, realistic calls to action. And I really appreciate those. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now that you've kind of retired from the VA and you're in a consulting role, what do you like to do here in the year 2025? What really lights you up about consulting?
Well, most of my consulting right now is focused on medical legal expert witness activities. To me, it's exciting because nearly every case is like a complex puzzle, exploring different facets of medicine and pharmacy. There is rarely, like when you first review a case, there's rarely like just an obvious answer. They're much more complex than you would think. So I really like expert witness work because I think it's kind of the intersection between science, justice, and in some cases storytelling. So it's kind of a combination of things. So I get to also translate medical complexity into clarity. So a lot of times the attorneys that you're working with, they don't have a medical background, right? They don't even know some of the key parts of the case that they're missing, and that's why they hire you, right? But you really take that medical complexity and then you try and make it, dumb it down to eighth grade speech, but you try and make it clear. It's interesting also because you're not only helping the attorneys, but you're helping the courts, the juries to understand the real world implications of clinical decisions, about pharmacy standards, and about patient safety. Because the audience, if you will, in this case, the juries often, they don't have the medical background to understand these complexities as well. So I do believe that it's also intellectually challenging. You're constantly learning. Every case that I have usually involves different drugs, sometimes many drugs in combination with each other. It requires me to go back and learn about, wow, that drug, I haven't seen that for 10 years, and what are some of the drug interactions with that drug and what are some of the precautions. So, at the end, you're not just a pharmacist, you are a communicator, you're a strategist. You talk to the attorneys about, well, this is what the case is about, and here's the strategy based on my review that you might want to consider using as the case goes forward. And it's that kind of that bridge between medicine and law. So it's kind of an interesting area for me to go into as an expert. But what kind of energizes me too about it is the advocacy, because you remember that behind every case, there's usually a person, whether it be a patient or a provider, in some cases, a health system that is under scrutiny. And they're kind of looking to you to bring truth and light, and show the evidence to that, because it's easy to accuse people of things in the medical or in the legal field. You can sue people for just about anything, right? But it's one thing about suing them, it's a different thing about whether they're guilty or whether there's mitigating circumstances. So I think it's fascinating if you're either defending the patient or you're defending a health system. It's fascinating to kind of get down to the facts and make those interpretations.
By any chance, do you enjoy board games?
um, Sometimes when I have time, yes, I do.
I love strategy games. Ticket to Ride is one of my favorite. It has a train theme and geography. You're going from one side of the country to another, or from one country to another country. Anyways, I bring that up because you sound like my kind of person. You like complex situations. You like trying to figure things out. My brain always wants to be active and figuring things out. And board games for me are kind of an outlet for that strength of figuring things
Yeah.
out kind of in the background. And I feel like you have more of a real life application for that, which is, these court cases. And I can understand your motivation. You're talking about justice, but then also using your clinical decision making and applying it to law. It's very different from practicing with humans, and not dispensing medications, but all the other things that you have done with your career. How did you get into becoming an expert witness and all of the consulting that you now do?
It's interesting that you bring that up because, I think as you were speaking, I was thinking about what I did before. And before I answer your question about how I got into it, is, I've always been a fixer, a person that can fix problems. And, a lot of people called me the MacGyver of things, whether it be fixing a car or anything else, right? I could fix your glasses if they break or whatever. So when I am on vacation, I bring a MacGyver kit with me that can fix just about anything, zip ties, tape, all that other good stuff. And a lot of that applies to pharmacy, and it applied to my career of, hey, I identified a gap. How do we fix it, right? And likewise, it applies to expert witness type activities. And I kind of fell into it a little bit. I actually did a little bit of it in the 1990s. I did a couple of cases, and then I just got too busy, with my pharmacy career, and I stopped doing it. But as I started getting closer to retirement, about 5 years before, I thought about, well, what do I want to do when I retire? Because I don't want to leave pharmacy entirely, and I'm not going to just drop out. So this looked like a great area for me to kind of be a fixer and a problem solver and do it on my own time. And the nice thing about consulting in my case is I'm given cases and then with documents to review and the like, and I do it when I want to do it, right? I can do it on the weekends, I could do it in the nights, in the mornings. I could fit it around my travel schedule. I travel extensively just for fun, and I can do it on the plane, So here I'm making money while I'm sitting on a plane doing nothing, right? So it allowed me the flexibility to kind of fit it into my lifestyle, if you will, going forward. It's not for everybody. When you get many of the cases get settled, but there are cases that go to court, and you got to be up on the stand and you got to testify, and it's sort of like we talked about presentations, right? They could be a little nerve wracking, but you think about, hey, I'm the expert and I'm here to talk to the jury and to tell them what I think and to put it in words they can understand. And so I use a lot of the skills that I used with research and publications and speaking, you get to use in the expert witness work. So I was fortunate that a friend of mine who was doing expert witness cases had some conflicts of interest and couldn't do some cases. And he said, hey, Anthony, you'd be great doing this kind of stuff, and you have the expertise. So he turned me on to a couple cases, and then the rest kind of just snowballed from there.
It really sounds like the perfect line of work for you in this stage, this season of your life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, good for you. I hope you're able to help a lot of people.
Me too.
We're starting to wind the interview down. I have just a couple of quick questions here. Now, I'm going to draw a parallel to when somebody has their 50th wedding anniversary or they turn 100 years old. People are always asking them, what's your secret? What's the secret of a long marriage? How'd you get to be 100? What's your secret? So I've got to ask you, Dr. Morreale, what was your secret to having this 40-year plus career in pharmacy, still enjoying it, still finding new things to do? What's your secret?
Well, you must know that my 50th high school reunion's coming up when you ask that question.
No, I did not know that. I got lucky there.
Yeah. So It's hard to say that there's a secret because I think many people prior to this, my mentors and other people have kind of shared these things too. But one, staying curious, right? Staying interested in new things, and not get like in a rut about things. I think promoting others who do great work, and I really tried to during my career identify talent and people who were very talented and get them into the right positions to help the profession be successful. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of that payback came to me later on in my career. And then teamwork. I think the secret to all of this is not try and do this stuff by yourself. Really being involved with other people who have good ideas and who can share the pros and cons of different projects is so important. And keeping in touch with the Pam Schweitzers of the world and others over time, and that's teamwork. Teamwork takes many forms, if you will, and I think that's one of the kind of the big secrets. To me, pharmacy is a human profession. Every patient, every colleague, every challenge is a chance to learn something new and become a better person and a better pharmacist. So, take advantage of that over time. So, you kind of, for me, I feel like my career, I've treated it as a lifelong residency program. Always learning, always adapting, trying to embrace change. And also, I think critically important was forget about the naysayers. Because all through my career of starting new programs, we always had people that said that's not going to work. I always told my team is go with the willing and forget about the naysayers, and you will be successful, because the willing are usually the people who are excited about a project or something, and they're going to make it happen one way or the other. So whether it's new therapies, new technologies, new roles, kind of lean into it.
I love what you said about staying curious. I totally agree with that. And don't listen to the naysayers. That's really good advice, too. Yeah. And speaking of being curious, I'm curious what's next for you?
Well, I want to go back to what we talked about in the first question is, people imagine their careers are plotted out for them and they kind of know what's going to happen in the future. And, the truth is we don't know, right? And so professionally speaking, my retirement for the VA and focus on expert witness work will likely be the same. And while I certainly enjoy that, I remain receptive to what might come in the future. And I just don't know, but I keep my eyes open for where things might be opportunities to learn and to grow. In the short term, keep doing what I'm doing. And then, of course, on a personal level, I continue my love of travel and photography. My goals really haven't changed when it comes to that. So my wife and I have been to more than 130 countries now, and we're planning on keeping the goal more. So that's both my professional and personal goals for next year.
Thanks for sharing that. I've got to ask, which country have you not been to yet that maybe I haven't even heard of? I love geography, so I need a challenge.
Okay, that you haven't heard of. So I have, let's see, a trip coming up that I'm working on to Kazakhstan.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Okay, and nearby there's other stands that you may not have heard of, but or maybe you have.
My
Um,
cousin actually is married to a diplomat and he's in Tajikistan, I think.
okay,
So are you
yeah,
going there?
no, I've been there.
Oh, have you? Oh
I've
my
already been
gosh.
there. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. When I went to Turkmenistan and all those other stands, so I just missed a few of them up in the top. So, but yeah,
Wow.
it's hard to surprise you if you're into geography. I am going in a couple weeks to Andorra. Do you know Andorra?
Yes, I want to say that's off the French coast.
It's actually a landlocked country, but it's closest to Barcelona, but
Okay.
then France. also, right? On the
Okay.
edge. It's landlocked between the two.
I am happy to hear about that. I have heard of that because I have a little box of flashcards of flags of countries. I love flags. I'm a vexillologist. I love flags. And on the back of the flag card is it's a map of the world and it shows you where in the world this country is. And yes, I've come across Andorra, but thank you for trying to challenge me.
Yeah.
I couldn't think
And it's so
exactly where it
small,
was.
it's like a dot.
I just got Ticket to Ride Iberia, I think it's called. So I'm about to learn a little bit more about the geography of the Spanish Peninsula.
Yeah, so we're going to Spain, Morocco, and Andorra. But I've been to Spain and Morocco, but not to Andorra. So it'll be fun.
Good for you. I love it. You should get a picture with the flag of Andorra and email it to me. That will make me happy. I love
You'll
geography and
have to
flags.
send me the flag because I couldn't identify that flag if I tried.
I can't think of it, but I think it's red and white and it's got a tree on it, but I could be wrong.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you in 3 weeks.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Have a great trip. Awesome. And now, as we start to wrap this up, one last question, and this is more for my audience here. What emerging trend or practice do you believe will be the most influential in shaping pharmacy over the next 5 years?
So looking ahead, I think the most transformative trends are going to be a shift towards pharmacists as frontline primary providers. So as I mentioned, especially in underserved and rural communities, that collaborative practice prescriber role is going to grow significantly now that a lot of states have really changed their laws to allow that to happen. I think the persistent shortage of primary care providers and specialty providers, for that matter, the aging population, those things combined really are going to be huge opportunities for pharmacists to manage chronic conditions. I think similar to think about where we are right now in pharmacy with vaccinations and things like that, kind of exploded over the last 5 years. We're going to see likewise, I think, collaborative practice and disease management explode. Genomics and cell therapy, which many people are now calling advanced therapeutics, is already revolutionizing medicine and pharmacy practice. You may know ASHP recently launched a whole advanced therapeutics section on their website. And it is because of the dollar values and gene therapy and all the other things coming, cell therapies. That is going to be not just a niche. I wouldn't call it a niche because it crosses almost every disease state, but it is certainly going to be impactful, whether it's starting in oncology, but it's going to rapidly move into neurology and to other therapeutic areas. And then you think about that kind of combined with artificial intelligence. I couldn't do a presentation and not mention AI. But I think there's a lot of advances in not only drug development, but in device development. And so I think there's going to be an explosion of different therapeutic options to treat diseases that we either currently don't treat or don't treat well. And so I'm talking about implantables. We already have implantables, for breathing and for hearts and for things like that. And of course, implantables into the brain. So I think they are going to change things and be very competitive against drug therapy because I think some of the devices have less side effects than some of the medications with, equal or better efficacy. So I do think that there'll be some niche areas for pharmacists to be, let's say, advanced therapeutics pharmacists, just like pharmacogenomic pharmacists are. But I also think it's going to be more widespread, that everybody's going to need to know pharmacogenomics and everybody's going to need to know about advanced therapeutics. So it will change pharmacy and medicine, I think, greatly for the better as we go through. So I think the future is unfolding in front of our eyes right now. And if you're not paying attention to it, maybe you haven't seen it, But if you start digging in on all the articles around advanced therapeutics, cell therapy, gene therapy, you're going to see this explosion of publications, which is just a reflection of what's happening out there in the research world. Lots of clinical trials, lots of pharmaceutical companies moving their money from traditional medications into these advanced therapeutics. So I hope that pharmacists will embrace those things and not just adapt, but that they'll lead the way in terms of implementation, monitoring, and use of advanced therapeutics.
Those were some very interesting areas you just named. And I think a lot of pharmacists really would be interested in following that. And hopefully, we can lead the charge with some of these advanced therapeutics areas.
Absolutely. It's a big opportunity. And again, it's going to impact every area. So whether you're a diabetes pharmacist or and now are switching people to, some implantable device, or they're starting to put in islet cells into people. You probably recently saw that they're using xenoplantation, transplantation and putting pig hearts into people, and xenotransplantations come a long way, and they can actually, because of CRISPR and other technologies, they're able to basically make a pig organ a human organ, and then grow these human organs, right? So think about how that revolutionizes, maybe we don't need hemodialysis centers in the future, right? It's going to fundamentally change a lot of different things. And those things are happening fast. And I think that people need to be aware of them and kind of cognizant that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be technologies that are going to supplant some drug therapies, but there's going to be drug therapy technologies that are going to treat diseases that we currently can't treat.
Amazing. It's an exciting time to be in medicine, for sure.
Yes.
Well, as we start to wrap this up, I'd like to open up the floor. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about or any advice you'd like to give my audience?
No, I think that you've covered a lot of areas in this podcast.
Yes.
And, at some time in the future, if you want to do something around advanced therapeutics, that's an area that I've been tracking and working on. So I did a recent presentation at APHA this last year on advanced therapeutics, and got a lot of good feedback about people being baffled about it, which means it was new to them. So I think that's a area that people are going to have to dive into. So, but thank you very much for inviting me to do the podcast, and I look forward to seeing the final result.
Yes, well, it's my pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thank you very much for offering to come back sometime. I might have to take you up on that. And I hope you have a wonderful trip overseas coming up here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacist's Voice podcast, episode 355. The show notes are on thepharmacistvoice.com. In the show notes, you will find Dr. Anthony Morreale's bio, his website, and his LinkedIn profile link. I've also got links to previous episodes of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast in the show notes, the ones that feature Dr. Pam Schweitzer, since I mentioned her today, and Dan Krinsky, RPH. There's a lot more links in there. Everything you need is on thepharmacistvoice.com. If you know someone who would like this episode or needs some inspiration for their pharmacy career, please share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, come on back. We've got lots more episodes coming up in 2025. Subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist's Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks for listening today, and I'll talk to you next week.